Hello, everyone, and welcome to a double shot of happiness. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. This is a 30 for 30 episode. That's right, 30 days of Springsteen, where every day in the month of November, we are having an episode dedicated to a different Bruce Springsteen album. This is also Scatter Shooting with Scott, our regular scheduled episode where once a month Scott Shea and I sit around and just basically BS about a topic that is of interest to both of us. And it works, our worlds collided because Scott had sent out a little note saying, "Hey, anyone want to talk about a certain Bruce Springsteen album?" And I said, "Wow, talk about great timing." So, first off, welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, this is always fun. I love getting to visit with you every month. But why don't you first off tell people a little bit, in case they've not listened to your earlier episodes, a little bit about you, and then talk about what album we're gonna talk about.
Sure, I am an author. I am the author of the book All the Leaves Are Brown: How the Mamas and the Papas Came Together and Broke Apart. It's a biography of the band and really about the music industry from that period, from the 1950s through to the early 1970s, and it covers all of the 1960s. And I also am a producer and documentarian for SiriusXM. I produce the Catholic Seeds a Day with Gus Lloyd morning program on the Catholic channel, and I produce several documentaries for the channel. And we are here to talk about Bruce's second album, The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. It was the subject of my most recent article for The Strange Brew. It's a UK publication, an online publication that specializes in music from the mid 60s and beyond.
And so what led you to talk about this second album?
It was the anniversary. I'm always looking for good tie-ins to make it timely. It makes it a little bit more appealing when you send out a press release and try to get some radio interviews. And being a producer myself, I know that producers and hosts like timely stuff. November 5th was of The Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. But the focus of the article was that it was his most important album in a way. I think it was more so than Born to Run, because it was Bruce against the world at that point. He had signed the previous year with Columbia Records and put out an album, Greetings from Asbury Park. Good album in retrospect, not really great when it came out. It came out with a resounding thud. Nobody really heard it. And Bruce had developed a pretty big following in the Jersey Shore bar scene as really a rock and roll band leader. And he comes out with this album that's really kind of singer-songwriter-ish. Not There's no guitar on it, hard other than just no. I shouldn't say there's no hot guitar licks like Bruce had been known for in Asbury Park. It was just gentle, early 70s guitar. I think the album's great. The songs have held up, but it was he had a small group of fans at that point in time, and it was not what they were expecting. The Wild, the Innocent, and E Street Shuffle was a response to that, reaching back to his Steel Mill and Bruce Springsteen band days, and coming up with this really great album that I think put him at odds with the people at Columbia, because they liked what they heard in Greetings and the direction it was going, and they thought that they had really signed James Taylor, Jackson Brown, singer songwriter. Yeah,
Right.
a
They
new
they talked about, but I think
the new Dylan.
everyone always looking for a new Dylan, even though Dylan was like 30 at the time.
Yeah, he was 31 years old.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
bring out and he was on Columbia Records.
Yeah.
So that was what spawned me to write it. It's always been something I've wanted to write about because I'm just so fascinated by that period of Bruce's career. I'm an origins guy. I like the early part. I think that's when an artist is at his or her most creative, most vulnerable, most transitional. There's just a lot of things going on. They're raw, and they're trying to refine themselves. They're going through the refining process, and it's to me it's fascinating.
One of the things that I do, um, perfectly good podcast, the podcast I do with Sylvan Groth, where we're going through every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. And we just recently did a song from John's first album, and it's not very good, the album. And Sylvan talked about that, though she is a passionate John Hyatt fan, and she goes, and I would put any of John's later works against anything by Bruce. She goes, it's very clear John's first album and Bruce's first album, night and day. Yeah. I, as you were talking about the story, and I want to get a little bit more into that, but it almost feels like it's Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I had my first album that was too soft.
Right.
Second album maybe too rock, and third album is just right, which
That's
is
right.
Born to
Yeah.
Run. Yeah, I've never heard that. I've heard Bruce talk about that in interviews about even though he was signed as a solo artist, in his mind he was always a band person, right? He wanted that band. And so what, based on your research and what you talked about, talk to me about what you think was going through their mind, and what, based on your research, do you think he was over, as you talked about, he was trying to course correct when he did Wild the Innocent and E Street Shuffle?
I think so. I think it's a good way of looking at it. It's funny that you say that about him being a band guy because, he was able to convince Columbia and Mike Appel, who was his manager at the time, to let him bring in his buddies from the shore to come and play on that first album.
Yeah.
And there's Danny Federici and Vinny Lopez, Clarence Clemens, Gary Talent. I think David Sanchez might have played on a little bit of it. I know Steve Van Zandt had a very minor part on Lost in the Flood. When he decided to put together a group to go out live, he had been gigging around Greenwich Village playing with Jackson Browne, David Blue, and Bonnie Raitt. That's a different world from where he was coming from, the Asbury Park, playing at the Pandemonium, the Upstage, the Sunshine Inn, and other places he'd been playing since the late 60s. And I think he missed that. And when the first album came out, and he was playing at the Main Point in Bryn Mawr, which is an hour away from Asbury Park, a little bit more than an hour away. And so he wasn't in Asbury Park when the day that the Greetings from Asbury Park was released. But when he went back, people were like, "What is this?" He played it for I guess one of his roadies at the time, Big Danny Gallagher, and he said, "Bruce, the album's great, but where's the guitar?"
Hmm.
So I think the feedback he was getting was like, "This is good, Bruce, but this doesn't sound like you." And
Yeah.
it's funny because when he would go back later and put live arrangements, or even really not long after the album came out, and put live arrangements for those songs to play on stage, the song's just got new life. Does This Bus Stop at 82nd Street? There's live versions of that from 73 and 74 that are just absolutely killer
Right.
and match the Wild, the Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle. So yeah, I think he went back. It was a course correction. He wrote these great songs, like I said in the article, just a travelogue of the Jersey Shore in New York City. Characters, some just completely made up, some based off of people he knew. That was when they handed that in. It only had, I think, 7 songs on it. And Clive Davis said, "There's no radio hits on this. Nothing can be played on the radio." So he went back and wrote "Blinded by the Light" and "Spirit of the Night," which is funny because 12 years later, the same thing would happen when he handed in "Born in the USA," and John Landau said, "We need a leadoff hit," and he goes back and writes "Dancing in the Dark." So it's something that played itself out a couple times in his career. He wrote just this great batch of songs, and just went in to 914 Studios. I guess maybe Mike Appel was trying to save some money, some advance money, and just cut this album. And again, when they handed it in, it was like, what is this?
Yeah.
The label execs weren't happy with that one.
So let's, I think you're trying to figure out the sound you want. And I do think there is this, as an artist, I've got my sound in my head and I know what I want to hear, and how do I put it down on a disc, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I said in my article, and I believe it, I think he really went back into his Steel Mill and Bruce Springsteen band catalog and style, and just gave it that approach and just refined it much more. That was a
Right.
different year, even though it was only 3 years earlier, it seemed more like 20 years because the music landscape had changed. Back in the early 1970s, it was okay to do big, long jams. And there was one song they did called Garden State Parkway Blues. It was like 30 minutes. They would play it on stage. And when you listen back to it, because there's some versions floating, or at least I know of one version that's really high quality, and it just sounds like Kitty's Back. It's got so many
Mhm.
different chord progressions from Kitty's Back in it, and I think Bruce just took that and just whittled it down to 7 minutes and gave us just an incredible song that he still plays live today, and took a long hiatus from it in the 80s and the 90s, but has since reuniting with the E Street Band has played fairly regularly in his catalog, at least once a tour, I would say, with the
Yeah.
band.
The other thought is the songs are long, right? We have 4 of the 7 songs are 7 minutes or longer,
Hmm. Right.
right? The other two, they're all over 4 minutes. So there is no more 3-minute record, or
No singles.
if you're going to have a hit, it's got to be 3:05, to quote another musician. What were you thinking when we're just speculating? What was he thinking? What is your best guess? Do you have a thought on why he wanted something that was a little bit more? Is it because they love jamming as a live artist and he's trying to push a little more for that?
Bruce was never a guy to be told what to do. And I don't think he's,
Right.
at least with his music. And I think that was maybe the start of it, because I think he compromised on Greetings from Asbury Park. He said, oh, okay, I got signed. Like, you're a new artist on a big label. You're
Sure.
20, you're what, 20, how old was he? 24, 23 years old when he cut that album. So he played their game. He did what they wanted him to do. He delivered what he thought they wanted. And again, it's a great album. It's got a few clunkers on there. I've never been a big fan of The Angel, and Mary Queen of Arkansas. It kind of lumbers a little bit, but
Right.
when he plays them live, I love it. But so I think that was maybe where he just decided, hey, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And we saw that even in Darkness on the Edge of Town, where he's writing songs that could be big hits, and in fact gave them away to the Pointer Sisters and to Patti Smith and other groups that had hits with these songs, but he rejected them. He did not want hits songs that sound, even though to me Badlands and The Promised Land sound like hits to me, but in his mind they weren't, and so he would reject those. I think he even went into the river with that mentality, but John Landau put his foot down. I think that was the start of it, and I think he didn't really care. I think he wanted to write an album based on his own experiences, based on the colorful characters in Asbury Park, and just get his band involved. It was really his first album where he went in with a band and with an intention of making a band album. Damn the Torpedoes. It's funny because Rosalita became a big FM hit. It was just played on the FM album stations and people loved it. It probably could have been released as a single. Hey Jude broke MacArthur
Right.
Park broke the rules, and you probably could have edited Rosalita down to 4 minutes if you wanted to put out a single mix. I think they missed the boat on that one. I think Rose, and as we see, Rosalita has endured the test of time.
Yeah, it is. It is an out. I mean, it gets played I mean, it's being played every night during the latest tour,
No,
right?
no, I think
Yeah.
he always felt he had to come back to it. I think the fans expected it of him. It was, at least for me, because I love Rosalita. I think to me, it's a little bit like Born to Run. If I never hear it again, I'm not going to miss it. It's just been played to death. But I don't discount that they're incredible songs and the importance of those songs. I'm more of like an Incident on 57th Street, New York City Serenade kind of guy.
Yeah.
But it is nice that he does, throughout his career, has always reached back to that era, because I always felt like he just wanted to move on from that era at
Yeah.
some point, really in the 80s, from beginning with the River Tour. I think he was just like, okay, I'm done with this. And with every great artist, there's the problem of too many songs and not enough space on the set list. So,
Yeah. Once again, to talk about John Hyatt, as we're recording this, I'm going to see him tomorrow night, and he plays almost nothing from before Bring the Family, maybe Riding with the King. And so some of his earlier stuff he never plays. And so I do know that there is an excitement when Bruce does Incident or East Street Shuffle or Blinded by the Light or Growing Up. And those are all great songs. So I get that. In fact, when the I've only seen him in New Jersey once. It was there at MetLife Stadium, and he was doing a 3-night show. 2 of them were in a row. Then he had to go to Chicago, and then he was going to come back and do a third night. And the second night was when I was going, and we had worried we'd picked the wrong night because that first night he had opened with New York Serenade with strings.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, and then he did open the second night with the same thing. We're like, oh, great. Yeah. I was on the record that I was never a fan of Kitty's Back. And then last year in 23, when he came to Dallas and that was part of the regular set list, I officially apologized to Kitty's Back. Seeing it live and the feel of a jazz club, the way he was
Mm-hmm.
doing the arrangement, I went, okay. Because my wife on the way home's like, what's that song where they had all the instrument? And that's Kitty's Back.
That's a real R&B funkified song. The thing he used to back, I've got a lot of his early shows.
Yeah.
He would always tell this story, and he would do it in that Bruce early '70s Bruce. Oh, I'm just gonna tell you the story, and he would talk about.
That's a pretty good fake Bruce.
Yeah, Mary's. There's this club that had this marquee. It said Mary 12 to 5. You're like, what is he talking about? But he was saying that there was this. I think it was in Neptune, New Jersey. Not far from Asbury Park, there was just this sleazy topless bar called the Showman's Club, I believe.
Okay.
And that was one thing that he saw on the marquee. It just said Kitty's Back. And I guess it was just a popular dancer. So he based the whole song about it. And like I said, he took a lot of the better moments of Garden State Parkway Blues and turned it into just this song dripping with funk and jazz. Have you ever listened to Garden State Parkway Blues?
No.
It's on YouTube. Listen to it, man.
I,
It's a clean, pristine version from, I think, Monmouth College.
and what's the name of it again?
Garden State Parkway Blues.
Got it.
Be some good listening, some new listening for you there.
All right.
My favorite versions are when Davey Sanchez was still in the band, because he would, when they played that live, he would put a wah pedal on his electric piano, and that song just dripped with funk. And I'm a big 60s, 70s R&B guy. I love that. And
Yeah.
to hear Bruce do that, and really really his jazziest, funkiest song. And even when after Davey left and Roy came in, and obviously Roy is one of the greatest pianists in the world, and Danny playing the organ on that one, they really made it into it still had its jazz underpinnings, but really made it into a rocking just jam. And I remember really falling in love with it when I heard one of his 1978 performances from Capitol Theater in New Jersey. I remember the first few times I heard Wildly Innocent in the E Street Shuffle when I was in high school. It was so different from everything. I was so used to Born in the USA, Bruce Springsteen, and The River, and Darkness on the Edge of Town and stuff like that. I was like, what is this? But it grew on me pretty quickly. And when I hear the restructured live arrangements that put a little bit more muscle into those songs, I always thought it would be cool if Bruce went back and re-recorded that album. And the first two albums, and just use the live arrangements. I think that would be really cool. I think fans would love it. But yeah, that's a song that was a real showstopper. I know when he played The Bottom Line in '75, I think it's like a 23-minute version of it. He would just lay it all out on that one.
So I would love for you to tell the story about how you gave the wrong answer to a Springsteen fan and you weren't able to get her attention again.
Yeah, that was back in '93. My high school buddy and I, we were going to see Bruce play at Madison Square Garden. I lived in New Jersey, and we were on the platform in Metuchen. And it's funny because I don't know why Metuchen was the only place I'd ever take the train in from New York City, because my dad worked in Metuchen when I was a kid. So whenever we would go from his work and go, even though there were closer train stations, we drove to Metuchen, because that's the only way I knew. And we're sitting there, we're excited, we're talking about the Springsteen show, and this lady, probably middle-aged, maybe just in her 30s, comes up and starts talking to us about Springsteen, because she could see we were fans. I don't know if we had T-shirts on, but she could just tell we were. I'm going to the show too. And we talked about a few things. The only thing I can remember is talking about, oh boy, I can't believe he broke up the E Street Band, which was 4 years earlier. But there's no internet back in those days, so news traveled slower. So we were talking about that, and then she asked, what's your favorite Bruce Springsteen song? And I said, my favorite is Downbound Train, which is a real oddball. It still is. I still love that song. It's still one of my favorites. But She just looked at this thing. She's, oh, you guys must be new Springsteen fans. I think my friend Carmelo said Tougher Than the Rest or something was like his
Yeah.
favorite. So she's, oh, no. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I love Institute on 57th Street. I could see where she was going with it. And she just she just walked away, like kind of in disgust. Really. And we're two 17-year-olds. What do you expect us to say?
Yeah.
Um, Yes, but it was funny because it just spurred me. I was in the middle of becoming a deep Bruce Springsteen fan, and it really pointed me in that direction of digging into that period of his career and really just falling in love with it. And been my main focus. Really, the first period of the E Street Band, 73 to 88.
That's your
Because there's
sweet spot.
yeah, that's like four different Bruce Springsteens in that
Yeah.
period. So it's like there's like he's a different guy in every 4 to 5 years. The transition and the change he did during that period was just profound and really never done again. It's to me that's what I love.
And I'm going to have you expand on this a little bit more about why you feel this album is one of his most important albums, if not the most important. But I want to give you what I think you're going to say, and I'm going to expand it. I don't know if you're a fan of Doctor Who, but Doctor Who is a British science fiction show, and the premise is that the lead character, the Doctor, regenerates. And the reason they did that is when they were going to lose the first actor, they were going to replace him. They came up with that the Doctor regenerates. And so there you could recast and have a new Doctor. Patrick Troughton was the second Doctor. And to many historians that love Doctor Who, say that he is one of the most important because he had to sell that I'm the same character, even
Right.
though I look different and I do. The other one is Christopher Eccleston, who, when Doctor Who came back in 2005, after he'd been off, since he had to sell this is the same character, right? And if you have that burden of trying to convince somebody you are the same thing, that is a heavy burden to do. And if you execute it, you get points for difficulty, same way you do like in skating or diving.
Mhm.
So when you were describing this, I thought of that this second album, you not only have the weight of not doing a software slump, which often
Right.
talked about, but also to the people that you said, where's the guitars? Where are this? So let's talk a little bit about your theory of why this is so vital. And I know you've expanded a little bit, but go a little further.
Okay. I think to me it's is most important because the birth of what of Born to Run, and what I mean by that is he was really challenged by the record label. He became an afterthought when he handed this album in. And because he was given an opportunity by Charles, I think it was Charles Koppelman, who was the head of Columbia. If Clive Davis had been fired and replaced, Goddard Lieberson took over. He had been the president of Columbia before Clive, and they brought him back after they fired Clive. And Charles Koppelman was brought in to really oversee the rock and roll releases. So he brought Bruce in after he handed in the album, and he told him, this is wrong with it. The songs are too long. You should really be playing with professional musicians. Didn't like the sound of his band on the record and urged Bruce to come and redo it. And Bruce said no. He said, I'm not going to redo it. I'm proud of what I've handed in, and we're going to go with that. It just put him in the doghouse, I think, with Koppelman and many of the other executives. John Hammond, who had signed him too, was gone. But John would go to see him at these shows and he'd be like, Bruce, what are you doing? Yeah, because Bruce had open disdain for Columbia executives. He would just go up there and I think he told one story in his autobiography of him just leaning into the microphone with his guitar and just swaying back and forth so the strings would hit this mic stand and make a horrible sound. And John Hammond's, Bruce, why are you doing that? You need these people on your side. It's not even so much that album, but that time period was just vital for Bruce because that's where he became Bruce Springsteen, the independent, just guy who's not going to be told what to do, like Neil Young. And what separated Neil Young from other artists, or James Taylor or Tom Petty, John Mellencamp, guys of that ilk, what separated them And I think it was a bold move to put this album out because I think a lot of the executives felt bamboozled. Hey, we had signed, like you said, the new Dylan. They thought a guy like he's going to be more like a James Taylor, a singer songwriter, give these nice, breezy, gentle albums. And here we're just getting this kind of Ziggy Stardust sounding stuff. I think it's the most important because that's where he became Bruce Springsteen, and that's what put him at odds with Columbia and put him on a short leash for his next album, which would be Born to Run, and really birthed the songs Born to Run and Jungle Land, which to me have more of a second album flavor to them. Born to Run's an interesting album because it's a mix of where Bruce had been and where Bruce was going. Some of the songs sound more in tune with what happened on Darkness on the Edge of Town. And then you had some that were a little bit more of what he had been doing with the first two albums. Meeting Across the River is another one. That sounds very Wild, the Innocent, and East Street Shuffle. That could have fit easily on that album. But then you have Night and She's the One and Thunder Road, which yeah, you're a little more in tune with the direction he was heading. And then he had that slick attempt at the Wall of Sound production, which I never really thought that it sounded on par with Phil Spector records, but there were certain elements to it that were very Victorian. Getting into the third album here, but yeah, so I don't think we would have Born to Run without Bruce doing what he did on the Wild, the Innocent, and the East Street Shuffle. And we know that with Born to Run, that's where the legend was born.
I like that explanation, and it's step 1 to 2 to 3 as going this. Is there as we're looking at the album, is there any songs on this that don't work for you? You mentioned a
Um,
little bit Angel on the first one, on this one.
I love every song on the album, but obviously the one that is so different is Wild Billy Circus Story because it just hits the brakes a little bit. I don't have the track order in front of me, but I think it follows Kitty's Back. I think it closes
Yeah.
out the
It
first album, and you go from this wild,
yeah.
jazzy, funky song to let's go to the circus. But the thing I like about that is Bruce was always really good at painting atmospheres and putting you in
Yes.
to the moment. Certain songs like Racing in the Street do that. The song that comes to mind that I've heard compared to it a lot is the Born in the USA outtake County Fair.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And he just absolutely, you can smell the early fall, autumn air. You can, the roast beef sandwiches being cooked over the open pit
Yeah.
that they would have at New Jersey State Fair. I used to go to the Flemington Fair growing up, and a lot of the fairs that were in New Jersey just kind of have a special kind of feeling to them. And you can just smell the wood burning and everything in that song. And Wild Billy Circus Story is the same way. It's just he puts you. Bruce went to the circus a lot as a kid. There was this one that would come through Freehold every year, and his parents took him. It concocts this really cool story, which that does fit with the theme of Wild, the Innocent, and Eastern Shuffle. It's just the arrangement. It's just very slow moving and really folksy. It's folksy, almost like it could have fit into Greenwich Village in the early 1960s. But that's really, to me, the only one that stands out. Bruce, that in true Bruce fashion, only had 7 songs that could fill that album, or there's only room for 7. But he came into the sessions with 12, so that was where that started. And Thundercrack, I think, was the other song. It's one of my favorites that was given serious consideration. But Thundercrack, Rosalita had replaced Thundercrack.
Right.
He didn't want to have 2 songs about dancing. He had written Thundercrack and Rosalita to just really create fans and just get people dancing because he was opening for groups like Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Roy Orbison and Chuck Berry, and wanted to leave an impression on the people and let them just have a really good time and get up and dance. And that's
Sure.
where those two. So there just wasn't enough room for Thundercrack on that album.
Yeah, and I know that there was disappointed in that Nebraska, Western Stars, a collection of short stories, right? But this is too. The Incident on 57th Street, New York Serenade. He is painting a picture of the life he's living and the
Mm-hmm.
people he knew. I've often talked about this, that in another life, he would have been a best-selling writer, an author, and he would have done novels and short
Yeah.
stories and poems. And he's always been a gifted storyteller. and the characters are real.
Yeah, he always had a great mind for that. And even in the Wild Billy circus story, he just tells this great story of just the underbelly of the circus and a guy trying to steal money and things like that. Yeah, he's a great storyteller. Even a song like New York City Serenade, there's not really a cohesive story in that song,
Yeah.
but it puts you in the moment in New York City after hours, where there's just weird things going on. And for a guy who used to walk up Seventh Avenue at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to work for 13 years, I've seen a lot of that stuff. I've seen the Vibes Man and the Trash Man and the Fish Lady, but it's almost like Neil Young. A lot of songs. I compared it to Cowgirl in the Sand and Down by the River from his first album with Crazy Horse, where the lyrics don't really make much sense, but it just puts you in the moment. It puts you in his where his thinking is, where he's going with it. It just paints these abstracts that just are just intoxicating. And New York City Serenade is the same way. It puts you in New York with these characters, and it's just really a song. It's a song about nothing, but that's good. Seinfeld was a show about nothing, and sometimes just being in the moment is more important than having a plot line.
And the song it reminds me of is, because I'm a child of pop radio, Chicago's Saturday in the Park.
Yeah,
It is much more upbeat, but the idea, there isn't really a story there.
yeah, man
Uh,
selling ice cream, singing Italian songs. Yeah, that's awesome. Puts
yeah.
you right in Washington Square Park.
Any other thoughts before I let you go?
No, it's like I think I told you before off there. It's not my favorite album. It's close to being my favorite album. Born in the USA is my favorite album because that's really where I came in.
Sure.
But you can say for up through Born in the USA, you could probably say this is Bruce's most important album. This is Bruce's most important. Born to Run was saved him from getting fired from the
Right.
label. Darkness on the Edge of Town reintroduced him after a 3-year forced hiatus thanks to some stupid judge in this case with Mike Appel. And The River was wanted to capture his live sound, and then he follows up The River with a folk album, Nebraska, just out of the blue. Really, the first time, I maybe the Wild, the Innocent, the Eastern Shuffle was it's like that. I guess maybe it's the second time Bruce just pulled the rug out from underneath everybody, and he's done that throughout his career. He did that when he broke up the E Street Band. He did that with Western Stars recently. That was just out of nowhere, just a completely different sound. And I think the reason I say it's the most important is because that's where all that happened. And as I've said it many times, that's where Bruce Springsteen, the legend, was born. And when a legend is born, you don't really know it at the time. It usually reveals itself a couple years later.
Yeah, absolutely. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
Oh, they can go to my website, scottsheaauthor.com. SHEA is how it's spelled. It'll show you where you can pick up my book and links to all my socials and all the articles from The Strange Brew. And got a good one coming up on the relationship between Jerry Butler and Curtis Mayfield.
Nice. Very good. All right. As I said, we're going to do this once a month. We'll figure out. Last time we said, okay, we'll talk politics next time because of the election. And then this came up, and I said, oh, this is a more fun talk to have.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think you want to talk about the election.
yeah, exactly. So thank you, my friend. This is always a lot of fun. Guys, gals, listeners, please pull out Wild and the Innocent. Just clear your mind, open your heart, and go back to those stories, those early Bruce stories, and enjoy them. For now, I want everyone to be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
All right,
Perfect.
man.